possible to know if she went by Theophanu or Theophania or Teophania, which are all close to Tiffany, but not quite. Who knows? Maybe she shortened it and her title was Tiff, Empress of the Empire, the top Tiff. But that's just speculation. When this word first became a Tiffany name precursor isn't exactly known. Spoiler for history, pre-printing press, there's not a lot of written evidence for anything, and lots of documents that did exist got lost. So to tell the totality of the tale takes trusses of trust betwixt the islands of evidence. It's time to try to find the true old-time Tiffs by working backwards through hundreds of years of census books. And if you did that in English, you wouldn't find much. Thanks for nothing, Doomsday Book. But if you also looked in French, you could find Tiffany Raguenel, born 1335, about whom all information is delightful. A noble lady astrologer who lived in France's fairy tale castle Mont Saint-Michel and who used her astrological powers to predict the outcome of her husband's knighting battles. Hey honey, maybe don't go on that one. And she was righter than wronger because he survived to ascend to become the Grand Constable of France, first officer of the crown. On the island, there's still a little museum to her and her husband. The one thing you won't find in that museum is her skull, which turned up just a few years ago in a relinquary box in the town of Dinan with a note on it saying this is the skull of Tiffany Raguenel and given anonymously to the local library. So that's a thing that happened. Wait, why are we talking about this? Oh right, because this is the oldest Tiffany that's pretty much spelled Tiffany and about whom details of her life are known. But were you to keep going backwards through the census books, you'd also strike a trio of Tiffany's in Paris in 1313. But all that is known about them is their listed professions: waxmaker, washerwoman, and spinster, a woman who spins wool into thread. Thus, this foursome of French Tiffany's written records are the proof that Tiffany is totally neon medieval. Though you might be wondering exactly how did a Greek name from here end up on a fancy French Tiffany over here? Me too. So if you kept looking through every old document that might be a list of names for hundreds of hours, if you were lucky, you would eventually stumble on the transcripts of charters related to Gilbertine houses from 1161, containing a single Tiffany, well, Tiffany with an EPH, but that's close enough to count, who lived in Fortherby, England. How did she get there? Well, we must cross another trust of trust, but Tiffany had a grandfather named Hugh who was at just the right time and place to travel to the Holy Land in the First Crusade. And going through the surviving records of Crusaders from the time, there are candidate Hughs. And while I can't prove the Tiffany-Hugh connection 100%, which kills me, I'm still calling it that Grandpa Hugh on his travels came across an epiphany Tiffany and brought the name back to Middle England and the English language, as also did French Crusaders to France. It all fits. But it does leave the question, if Tiffany in its modern form is near a millennia old, why don't we think of it that way? Probably just historical happenstance, a lack of famous Tiffany's. There were no queens born on the Epiphany to be named Tiffany, leaving Theophanu as the most prominent Tiffany, except not exactly a Tiffany, and Tiffany Raguenel isn't particularly famous, until hopefully now that is. If you go on your own French Tiffany crusade, be sure to tell him Gray sent you. So aside from these two, the name never landed on fame to pop in popularity like it would later, just sporadically showing up in written records in the late 17 and 1800s, which as an alternate history side note, it does mean that at the time Jane Austen was writing Emma, the name Tiffany was infrequently around with its exact modern spelling. So if the authoress was looking for an underused name with literary potential, she could have picked Tiffany and turned the Georgian and Victorian eras neon as well. And I mean, come on, the name of Tiffany Woodhouse is totes perfect for the character. But sadly, it didn't happen and Tiffany remained a name without fame. She would get there, but jumping backwards, she first needed to transform. In 1629, Tiffany does appear on an English census finally, this time for the first time as a last name with one Mr. Henry Tiffany who lived and died in Hackney, London. Okay, so he wasn't born a Tiffany. Were you to track down his christening, you'd find he was Henry Tiffin at the time, but once grown up and married, the record now shows him as the first of the family of Tiffany. Why the name changed? It probably wasn't one. Consistent spelling in the English language totally wasn't a thing back then. None other than Tiffin Tiffany's contemporary William Shakespeare never spelled his signature the same way twice. English was, and still kind of is, very whatever with the written word. So Henry Tiffin became Tiffany randomly, and because the world is just too perfect sometimes, I'm also calling it that this Mr. Tiffany, the first to appear with the last name in the English language, is directly responsible for this explosion of Tiffany's 400 years later. Come with me. So Henry Tiffany had a son in 1630, Humphrey Tiffany, who moved to the shiny New England sometime before 1660. Humphrey Tiffany took the name to America and simultaneously removed it from England as a last name, as he was Henry Tiffany's only surviving son, who would also have a son, James Tiffany, in 1666. From there, James Tiffany Jr. 1697 to Ebenezer Tiffany 1734 to Comfort Tiffany 1777 to 1812, Charles Lewis Tiffany, which has caused some bulbs in the audience to light, but to follow through, Charles Lewis Tiffany with some friends established a stationery and fancy goods emporium shop named Tiffany Young and Ellis in 1837. Charles Lewis Tiffany eventually took control of the company, changed the name to Tiffany & Co. to focus on jewelry exclusively, well, except for the period during the Civil War when he switched to manufacturing swords as the Tiffany Experience, but after that, back to jewelry. From the late 1800s, this New York City store for Tiffany was her most prominent placement since The Empress or The Astrologer, and it remained so until 1958 when Truman Capote walked by. The name caught the author's attention as underused with literary potential, and he wrote and published the novella Breakfast at Tiffany's. Prior to this moment, Tiffany as a first name was holding on, but barely, averaging under 10 babies a year. After the novella, there's a slight uptick in the name, but that could be a coincidence. But what definitely isn't is in 1961, the novella became a movie starring Audrey Hepburn. And it would not be understatement to say that this role turned her into a time-transcending Hollywood icon forever connected with the name in the title. Tiffany had found her fame, and the following year, the Tiffany's quintupled, setting a solid base for an exponential explosion, and grew over the next 20 years as children grew, having seen the movie, to have children of their own, bringing us to 1979, and there are almost 10,000 Tiffany's a year. Now, we are still on a trust of trust for this Tiffany theory. Maybe it wasn't the story-turn-movie. It could have been a coincidence. If you look at enough random events, you can always draw some convincing correlations. But remember that in ye olden days of the 60s and early 70s, movies could only be seen in theaters. But by the late 70s, there was a new invention, VHS, the video home system, so you could watch movies anytime in glorious 480 pixels. And, well, guess what? Breakfast at Tiffany's happens to be the first Audrey Hepburn movie released on VHS in, wait for it, 1979. And 1 year later, total Tiffany's doubled, rolling into the 80s torrent of Tiffany's, where the name was top 20 for 9 out of 10 years. The Tiffany ascendancy that had started with Theophany in prehistory. And that is the tale of Tiffany. She's carried her neon torch through the ages, and long may she carry it into the future. To Tiffany. Ta-da! It's a video about Tiffany. I hope you like it. Psst, hey, would you like to know more? Okay, great. So listen, I need to tell you about this poem. Come with me behind the scenes where I've been working on this for, I don't even know how long. Take a seat. Get comfortable. It all began with these articles I read saying the name Tiffany is very old, maybe medieval. What a cute and easy video, past Gray thought, and it could have been, if I had just left things alone. But no, I wanted to read the article sources, which turned out didn't often contain the name Tiffany at all, but rather the ye olden name Theophania, or the super old Theophanu. And like, maybe these medieval ladies called themselves Tiff, but that's just a bit too cute, isn't it? To me, it looked like the sort of Lady Godiva story where later writers say a thing happened, but there's no evidence from the time that it did, because it's a fairy tale. The kind history is full of once you go looking. Don't go looking. So for a while, the Tiffany video teetered on the edge of getting binned, but it turned out my Lady Godiva suspicions were wrong when some medieval Tiffany's did turn up, up to save the project. But the poem happened before that, and listen, I need to tell you about it, otherwise I might just explode trying to contain all the excruciating details and number of obsessive hours poured into this poem, and I can't let it all have been for nothing. Okay, ready? No? Too bad. Here's the poem. William de Conisby came out of Brittany with his wife Tiffany and his maid Manfas and his dog Hardegras. It's okay, that's it. But what isn't okay is that this poem popped up in modern writings, implying it's proof that Tiffany is maybe medieval, but never with the poem's date or an author attached, making it impossible to pin to a timeline, which made the poem annoying. Doubly so because it's supposed to be a joke. Like, here it is in this 1859 history book with this weird French-style humorous illustration, but I don't get it. Is it the name of the dog? What's the joke? If you get it, please leave a comment. I need to know. Anyway, when you're reading about a topic, this is the sort of thing that happens a lot. There's some detail you keep stumbling over and over, and it could be the critical clue. I'm looking for the earliest Tiffany A&Y. There's a Tiffany A&Y right here. Maybe the very first if I could just pin the poem to its proper place. But no, I had just resolved to give up on this poem when the Tiffany's of America arrived at my door, which I had ordered weeks ago to hopefully help with the main Tiffany video, but it was just 90% a literal list of people named Tiffany in America with hilariously unclear photos. The book was written by Nelson Otis Tiffany, and thanks to Charles Lewis Tiffany for making the book possible with his liberal contributions of money. I love how explicit that is. Then, totally unrelated, there follows a description of how the Tiffany family crest is the most beautiful thing of its kind we have ever seen, and then 2 pages of the densest family flattery ever put in print. But in between those 2 sections to mock me, the poem appeared again, without a date, but with a footnote path to follow. This is the moment I broke, and swore to the gods above and below I would find the primary source of this Brittany Tiffany poem, no matter the time, no matter the cost. And when you give that to the gods, they, of course, played a joke upon Gray, making his pursuit of this poem as painful as possible. Here's what happened. The Tiffany's of America got the poem from Richmondshire, its ancient lords and edifices, which I ordered, and when it arrived found the full title to be Richmondshire, its ancient lords and edifices, a concise guide to the localities of interest to the tourist and antiquary with short notices of memorable men. I opened it, and out fell an old map, which is a thrilling moment no matter what's mapped on the map. After checking for spots marked X, back to the book to find the poem, which had a pencil highlight mark and a note below. It seems whoever owned this book before me was also on their own poetic Tiffany journey. Maybe it was Nelson Otis Tiffany. I don't know. So Richmondshire, its ancient lords and edifices, a concise guide to the localities of interest to the tourist and antiquary with short notices of memorable men, list the poems from the author M. Thierry. Now, buying old rare books gets expensive real fast, so I headed down to my local library to try and track M. Thierry down, which took a while because, 1, I didn't know then, but I do know now that M is an old abbreviation for Mr., and the author reference was Mr. Augustin Thierry and his book The History of the Conquest of England by the Normans. And 2, my library predates the Dewey Decimal System, which makes every book search an adventure through 17th century organizational idiosyncrasy, which is delightful when you're browsing, but infuriating when you're in the wrong section about England and you can't find the book you're looking for because you should be in the England only section, but not here behind the little book elevator. Anyway, Thierry's book was on the shelf. I grabbed it, sat down with it, and flipped through the pages to find the poem. And that History of the Conquest of England by the Normans isn't the primary source either, pointing to Herne Pradif ad John de Fordham Scotic Chronicon. Okay, what's the Scotic Chronicon? According to Wikipedia, it's a history book of Scotland, started in the 1300s by a priest in Aberdeen and continued after his death by an abbot in Inchcombe. These historians worked to cover the history of Scotland from their present day back to the literal Genesis, a rather epic undertaking deserving the epic name the Scotchanomicon. Fun fact, this book is one of the earliest references to Robin Hood, though the authors take a rather more dim view of the Hood and his hoi polloi fans than most modern interpretations. According to them,
rules are made to be broken. Like buildings. Or people. I'm trying to care. I just can't.
Welcome to Summoner's Rift.
I'm wearing lots of belts.
30 seconds until minions spawn.
Gonna be an easy fight.
Don't make me put my goggles on.
Minions have spawned.
I'll be at the graveyard if you need me. Ski mask all black when you see me. Mankind is a fucked up species. Look at the apocalypse on the TV. Linkin Park in the
like a star. I'm an asshole, let me tell you so. Like a star. I'm an asshole, let me tell you so. Motherfucker. But I like a star. I'm an asshole, let me tell you so. Let me fucking say. How I'm talking be. Leave my body by the liquor store. I'm an asshole, let me tell you so. Talking be. Motherfucker. Motherfucker.